The tree disease that I'm going to talk about next within our Observatory Priority Pest and Disease series is Acute Oak Decline, or AOD. This is a serious disease affecting both of our native oaks. It's a complex disease and it involves possible relationships between a number of bacterial species and a native beetle, Agrilus bigottatus, or the oak jewel beetle. This disease has affected thousands of our oaks, mostly across East Anglia, Midlands and South East England. It causes a rapid decline in the trees. It can kill them within 5 years. It's mainly mature oaks that are older than 50 years which are affected. This was first noticed in the UK in the 80s, and a similar condition has been observed in Europe since 1918. So what are the signs and symptoms of AOD that we'll be looking for then? Well, one of the main symptoms is extensive bleeding of a dark fluid from lesions or splits in the bark of tree stems. There may be bacterial hollows beneath the bark at the point of bleeding. You will see weeping patches which tend to be vertically aligned on the trunks of the oak trees. We may also see larval cavities and D-shaped exit holes of the beetle Agrilus bigottatus. And also the tree canopy may show signs of deterioration. Here we can see some trunk bleeding. This stem bleeding occurs between 1 and 2 metres above the ground and can extend right up into the canopy. The bleeds are always vertically aligned, so one on top of each other. A severely affected tree may have around 20 weeping patches, and on a highly infected AOD site, bleeding can be seen on around half of the oaks present. If we look at the bleeding in a bit more detail, then we can see that it comes from splits in the bark that are longitudinal and form between the bark plates. These are usually between 5 and 10 centimetres long. We can also see that these cracks have characteristic blackened, ragged edges. Bacterial hollows or cavities form beneath the points of the bark where the bleeding occurs. And it's the fluid from this cavity that spills over to create the bleeding that we see on the outside of the tree trunk. The photo here shows an inner bark lesion. The light blue arrows that you can see point to the light areas of the lesion and show fresh breakout zones of necrosis. The dark zone lines mark the seasonal halt of the lesion expansion, and they're shown by the green arrows. And the total tissue degradation forming a cavity is shown by the red arrow. So once these inner bark cavities form, then cracks like this appear between bark plates in overlying areas. And here we can see some clear dark fluid seeping from cracks between bark plates. So when might we see this bleeding? The bleeding usually occurs in the springtime and then again in the autumn, so not in the midsummer or midwinter months. Although the actual bleeding occurs only at certain times of the year, we still may see evidence of the bleeds throughout the year as the bleed stains the bark, leaving black streaks on the stems. As I mentioned before, there is a possible relationship between a native beetle, Agrilus bigottatus, and the disease of AOD. Well, here is the beetle. You probably won't actually see the beetle itself in the field, as it is elusive and it's a canopy dweller. So it would come out of its hole and scuttle up to the canopy. However, you may see the exit holes, which are characteristically D-shaped, and these are very common on AOD sites. The adult beetles lay eggs deep in bark crevices, and the newly hatched larvae tunnel through the corky outer bark to feed on the nutritious inner bark and cambium, creating a lattice of sinuous galleries hidden beneath the surface. This is shown by the blue arrows in the picture. It has been suggested that the bleeding may be a response from the tree to attack by these beetles, And the red arrows in the picture shows a larva which has been drowned by the flow of liquid from a bleed. The green arrow shows a live larva in an unaffected area. If the larval density is high, the galleries may restrict the flow of nutrients within the tree, reducing its health. This girdling effect has been implicated in tree mortality. If the number of larvae are low, trees can recover, producing callus tissue to heal over galleries. The mature larvae eventually pupate in the outer bark plates before the adults emerge, creating the characteristic D-shaped exit holes. Other pathogens can also cause bleeding on oak. For example, the honey fungus or Armillaria species. There are a few differences between the signs and symptoms of honey fungus and AOD, which help us to differentiate between the two different diseases. For example, the honey fungus bleeds occur first near the base of the trunk and align sort of horizontally, so around the tree, whereas the AOD bleeds appear 1 metre up at least and align vertically. Underneath the bark with honey fungus, you may see white mycelial fans, the rhizomorphs, which are the bootlaces, and also fruiting bodies. These obviously would be absent if the disease was caused by AOD. With honey fungus, there is no cracking between the bark plates, but with AOD, there is. And the colour of the inner bark infected by honey fungus is pale and dry, whereas that infected with AOD is dark, brown and moist. I should just mention that larval galleries of Agrilus, shown by the blue arrows on the photo, may also be present in trees affected by honey fungus. Look-a-like symptoms can also be produced by various Phytophthoras. Phytophthora bleeding can be mistaken for early signs of AOD. There are some differences between the two diseases, though, that help distinguish between them. So, for example, Phytophthora bleeds first occur at the soil surface or the trunk interface and then migrate up the stem. The colour of a Phytophthora bleed is a purplish black, whereas an AOD bleed is a browny black. The Phytophthora bleed doesn't flow from cracks between bark plates like that of the AOD, and Phytophthora attack is not normally associated with the Agrilus beetles. Here you can see large cracks between the bark plates from which the acute oak decline bleeds originate from. As you can see, the cracks are quite blackened. If I turn the wood into cross-section, you can clearly see the inner bark cavities which form beneath the bleeding points in acute oak decline.